What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and today I'm going to be giving my reasons and my thoughts and opinions on the companion mechanic and ultimately what should happen to it going forward, whether it should show up in future designs, if it should just be yeeted into the sun. And if you watch like my recent videos, and you would know about my recent videos if you subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so that you knew when I uploaded videos, you would know how I feel overall about the companion mechanic. So, without further ado, let's kind of jump right into it. So, for those of you who have not played with the companion mechanic or maybe confused by the companion mechanic, as you can see on all these creatures in front of us, they all have companion and some text after that word. In the case of cards like Yorion, your starting deck has to contain at least 20 cards more than the minimum deck size. The minimum deck size for Modern and Pioneer and most constructed formats, I would say competitive play outside of like competitive EDH is usually 60 cards. So Yorion requires that for you to be able to cast this card, or really to put it into your hand, paying 3 mana, and then being able to cast it, your starting deck has to contain at least 80 cards. Obviously, it can have 100 cards, it can have 200 cards, whatever. Has to have at least 80 cards, 20 more than the minimum deck size. Cards like Obosh and Garuda care about whether they're even or odd converted mana cards. Um, Jengatha and Kihira, or well, Kihira's case, wants you to have all the creatures in your deck be Cat, Elemental, Nightmare, Dinosaur, or Beast cards. Jengatha, no card having the same mana symbol in its mana cost. So basically saying that cards cannot be double black, double blue, so on and so forth, but they can be blue red or blue black, so on and so forth. Lurrus, probably the biggest offender on the list next to Yorion. Each permanent card in your starting deck has a converted mana cost of 2 or less. With Karuga being that all of your spells have to be 3 or greater and land cards. Um, so without, I guess I went over like basically the main ones, the big hitters. Lutri and like Zidra um, do some pretty cool things. Lutri basically makes you play commander for a constructed format and can copy an instant or sorcery spell that you cast. Choose new targets for the copy when it enters the battlefield. Amori tells you to play with the same type. They all have to share the same card type. And when it enters the battlefield, you choose a card type, and cards of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. Notably, it does not have to be creatures. It can be like instant sorceries, enchantments, so on and so forth. And it will reduce that cost as long as you name it, and of course you can cast it from your sideboard. Zerger the Dawnbreaker, all of your cards in your deck have to have an activated ability. It costs 2 less to activate, can I make it less than 1 mana to activate said ability. And for some reason it gives a target creature can't block this turn for 1 and tapping it. Which is to me is like kind of weird just to like throw it on there because some of these cards really don't have activated abilities like that. So if you followed the modern format, if you followed really any constructed format, you know, like especially for the Eternal ones, Lurrus and Zidra, for like vintage going, to the ultimate busted format, Power Nine's legal. Really, nothing is banned besides like anti cards and other cards that are just like Chaos Orb, like Dexterous, is what they consider Dexterous cards. But Lurrus had to be banned in that format for the fact that you had like you had Black Lotuses, you had Lotus Petals to a lesser degree, and just very very powerful cards like Snapcaster Mage, things like that, that you could play in Vintage, and Lurrus just allowed you to play them back for free. I mean, getting to before the nerf of Companion, where you had to pay 3, you just had to pay its mana cost to play it from your sideboard. So in theory, you could just play Lotus, crack Lotus for triple black, and then play a Lurrus from your sideboard, and then just recast the Lotus from your graveyard. And your opponent really had no way to interact with it outside of like Force of Will, like a counter spell or whatever for the Lurrus, especially on turn 1. So essentially, in those cases, like you just got a 3/2, and then if it just lived past that turn, you just always got a Black Lotus every turn, which allowed you to play, some haymakers and really get ahead on mana, which, getting ahead on mana, getting ahead on cards usually is a recipe for winning a game. So Lurrus had to be banned in a format where cards are not normally banned unless they inherently like break the game, and Lurrus broke it for sure. Zerdra, I know like got limited or in some way, I believe in Vintage. I don't think it got banned, but I know for a fact Lurrus did. Moving up to like Legacy and things like that, like I believe Lurrus is actually on that list as well, which is kind of a shame because I think Lurrus is really sweet. Also got put on the same time, or I believe around the same time that like Underworld Breach got put on there. And again, I believe this was pre-nerf as well. So like in the two oldest formats, Vintage and Legacy, Lurrus got the band hammer. The rest of the ones really were not playable, but Lurrus got the hammer. Zerdra probably sees play because, you know, there's some really broken cards with activated abilities that are kind of expensive, but definitely get cheaper with it. The Dawn Waker as you go. And of course, modern, the format that my channel is like lived and died on essentially. The format that like if there was only one Magic format I could play for the rest of my life, it would be that format. And you have probably the widest variety of companions that are actually playable. Kahira, who was for a while played as a companion for blue white control decks, because they played no creatures, and technically each creature in your deck fits the requirement of being all set creature types, so you could just play Kahira essentially as like a win condition that wasn't in your deck. Jangata, recently seen in some of the iterations of like Grixis Shadow. I believe also in like the 5 color like Niv Mizzet, like Bring to Light decks. They also play Jangata as well. Some Obosh Red like aggro decks. Garuda, I believe, was like experimented with because again, when you could cast it from your sideboard and stuff, you could just clone it a bunch of times, give them all haste, kill your opponent. Yorion, of course, probably played in the best deck in the format, in like the 4 color Blink piles, 4 color Elementals, so on and so forth. Lurrus, the OG companion for like Grixis Shadow, Blue Black Hammer, or White Black Hammer, and all these other like smaller kind of like creature decks that get to either play Ragavan or bring back hammers, sort of kind of things like that. Um, and the one that actually got banned out of all the companions from the modern format, if you can sense a theme there. Omori, I believe before the nerf, got to see some play, just doing some interesting things of just like making your spells cost less. And that's really it. I mean, like, Lutri, Karuga, didn't really see play like outside of standard, and even in standard they saw very very fringe play. I know the Fires of Inventions deck back like when this set came out in standard, they would play Karuga because they just get to play and gas back up, draw more spells, and of course you just got to play for free because of Fires of Invention. Lutri was there. And of course, there was like a blue or a white black deck that played Lurrus as a companion. That was very, very good. I actually like won like an insane amount of matches in a row to climb like from bronze all the way to like platinum or diamond or something crazy like that. Just really powerful stuff. Garuda also being like a top tier deck in standard pre nerf. People playing like Jangata, basically, to wrap it all up, and what I've been talking about for the last however many minutes and going over the highlights of a lot of these cards is that in like pre-nerf, they were like they were busted. Like there was no reason to not play a deck that wasn't playing a companion, especially if you just get to cast it from your library. No extra mana necessary to where the way we know the rule now. But even nowadays, we're just having to pay 3 mana to put Yorion or in the before times like Lurrus and stuff like that into your hand to play them really wasn't that big of a deal because the upside of getting them and their abilities were just so powerful that it basically circumvented the companion cost. It really like diluted diversity and things like that for basically what decks you could play because you didn't want to play. There was like Jund decks that were playing Lurrus as the companion. You just never got to play Liliana, Tireless Tracker, things like that. You were stuck playing cards like Hexdrinker and Tarmogoyfs and things like that, which cards you'd probably play anyway. And not to say that the decks were necessarily bad, but it just de-incentivized you from playing other three or greater permanent cards because Lurrus just didn't care about them, and Lurrus was so good. Same with Yorion. Like people just are playing 80 card decks, and there's nothing wrong with obviously playing, you know, decks that are like bigger than the deck minimum size. There's always been the argument for like 61, 62 cards, whatever. But you just have like these decks that are just able to cram all of these different like es- e- e- essentially stop gaps and stuff for like other decks where like decks like this would tend to have like a terrible matchup and things like that. Or like it's kind of close, like they just get to put Yorion in their hand. I've seen people pitch to like Solitude, Subtlety, things like that. But I've also just seen it, where it's like a kind of a close game, whatever. One player slams a Yorion with a few like draw card permanents into play, just gets to reset them, see 4 or 5 more cards, and like the game's over just because they basically drew a whole new 7. Yorion basically got to play Gristlebrand, and on top of it, leave back a 4/5 flyer, which is really hard to deal with. And even if you do eventually deal with it, Yorion got its value and stuff like that. So overall, in this long-winded video, talking about why the companion mechanic was so good, and even when they nerfed it, there's only a few companions that were really good to survive that kind of nerfing, because it really should have been a death knell for a lot of these. I mean, it just, especially for modern, the very efficient as that format is, and even with legacy and vintage and stuff, some of these cards were just that good to where you just had to play them anyway, even with the restriction, on top of even the deck building restriction. So overall, my thoughts and opinions on Companion, I like the intent of it. I like the idea of like getting paid off for building your deck in a certain way that you basically get access to an extra card that does something pretty powerful. But obviously the execution and everything I think is done uh, poorly, mainly for the fact that maintaining these cards as well, where some companions are ban worthy and other ones are not. So I think overall, while I personally like the companion format, I think it's a neat idea. I kind of like the idea of getting to play a card from outside of your sideboard, given meeting a certain restriction. But overall, I feel like the companion mechanic needs to go. I think you just need to ban every companion in, every format that companions are legal in, and just leave it at that. Leave the deck building restrictions at the door. Just get rid of it. It's not fair to a lot of these companions because some of them are not that good in the older formats like Amori, Karuga, even like Jengatha at times can be, to me, feels a little bit clunky, but I'm sure other people would disagree. Um, but overall, I think to be kind of fair and just kind of wipe the slate clean, ban every single card that has the companion mechanic on it. Maybe one day it can come back, but I think in the current iteration that it stands in, that we should just not have any of these cards legal in the format. So, if you made it to the end of this video, my long-winded rant, basically just highlighting highlights of companions and things like that. Leave a comment down below if you think that companions should stick around, how you would rework it, or if you just don't want to see them at all. And while you're here and while you're in that comment section, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell for my channel. I always love the support. It really keeps me going on making these videos, coming up with new ideas and different discussions and topics and things like that. And your support is always greatly appreciated. And yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed me going kind of in depth on like companions, my thoughts, feelings, and things like that. Hope you all enjoyed watching, and I will see you all in the next video.